Alright, so I've cleaned off some of those other things and I'm now ready to talk about the final supplies that I have on my supply list for my students, and that are good things just in general to have for watercolor. So one of the biggest things would be a palette, and the palette that I use is a Stephen Quiller Quiller palette, and it has a big center opening and then lots of wells. I think it has 34 wells in here, and then I've actually adjusted this one with some hot glue in order to give myself a few more wells right there. And that's quite a few openings to put your paint in. One of the reasons that I like this palette is, one, because the wells are quite deep and you can put a lot of paint into them. And then the big mixing center is really nice to have so that I can do lots of mixes there. And then the lid of that palette, let me move those things, is also great for using to mix on. So this one comes, it is a plastic palette, and it comes with the lid, and so when you're traveling to a class or if you're going somewhere with your palette, then it's easy to protect the paint and cover it up. So, and then also it works as a mixing place. There are plenty of other palettes out there. One thing that I would avoid is getting one, and this is one that I've actually used with acrylics, but you can get plastic ones that are around this size, and it's fine to have your color in there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you could put all of the pigments that I suggested into this, but then there is nowhere to mix. So you either would need to have a white plastic plate that you could mix on, or something that is generally for watercolor you want it to be white. Even this gray one is a little wrong to mix color on because you're not quite seeing the color the way you need to in order to work with it. It kind of changes the look of the color. So it's better to have your palette be white. So you can get plastic ones at craft stores and things like that don't cost very much, maybe a couple dollars. But then you need somewhere to mix, so it's not really serving the purpose. Plus there's no cover for that, so then you're having to be careful with your paint. Or I have actually seen students put their pigment in the palette and they'll squeeze out just a tiny little bit, because then they feel like in order to take this anywhere that they need to clean it out before they go home. So it kind of defeats the purpose of having paint that you can re-wet and reuse. So the acrylic pigment that's in here is not re-wettable, and this is something that I would need to try to clean out in order to get it back to the white. So this is another option, and I cannot remember the name, unfortunately, but something like this. And I bought this through one of the online art stores, and it comes with let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 33 places for pigment. And this was empty, so this one is loose in here. I'm going to move it out of the way for a minute. So this palette, and same with this palette, they come without any pigment in them. And then I just filled it up with what I wanted to use in this palette. And this palette also has a separate mixing piece that you can take out, and you could have it sitting on your table next to it. And then it also has the white one in the lid that you can use to mix. And then I took mine and took a photograph of the paint, and then I printed it and used some clear tape to tape it to my palette so that I could remember what pigments I had where. So for this palette, I've used it long enough, and I've had the pigments in the same location long enough that I know where they are. But that is one thing, that when you're laying out your paint in your palette, you can either take a permanent marker, and on a few of these, I'm not quite sure if you can see them because they're kind of dark, on a few of these I've written with a permanent marker on the edge of the palette, and so I'll write the name, and sometimes I'll write the initials of the brand of paint. And then recently I went and found online the Daniel Smith color chart that lists the different colors and the information about each color, and I printed that and then cut them out, and I have taped them to the edges of my palette just to give myself a little more information if I have a question about whether a paint is light fast or transparent or opaque, and those are things that I will go over in class. But so those are a couple palettes. You can get travel palettes, but like I said, for this one, because it's gray, it kind of changes what you're seeing in your colors, and it doesn't give you very much room to mix your paint. So if you're in a class situation, and maybe even just painting at home, most of the time it's better to have a larger area to mix your paint. They also have palettes that are rectangular, and just various different sizes, but I think a palette with a lid is a really good thing to have. This is also a travel palette, and the problem with this palette is that, and you can see I have some loose paint here, is that the wells where you put your paint are not very deep, and so I can't put very much pigment in these. So if I go to mix a bigger amount of paint, I'm not going to be able to get as much out of these, and I'm either going to have to carry my tubes with me when I go to a class or go to paint somewhere else, or I'm just not going to be able to do very big washes of color. So I think, and then this one also is a creamy color, which is all right, but it and that may be because it's the sun has faded it, because the top is a little whiter. But so when you're looking for a palette, I would look for something that has deeper wells, like this one or this one, and then something with a lid and a larger mixing area is good to have. Okay, move these out of the way. And then I already mentioned the Gatorfoam or Gatorboard that I staple my paper to. I showed you that in the first part of the video. So that I think is good to have, or to buy a watercolor block in order to already have your paper held down. You can buy 300-pound paper, but the thicker the paper, the more expensive it is. So a sheet of the 22 by 30, excuse me, I'll reach across here. The 22 by 30 paper, like I mentioned, is, depending on where you buy it, somewhere around the $5 to $8 range in 140-pound paper. But if you buy 300-pound paper in the same size, 22 by 30, it can be as much as around $11 to $15, depending on where you're buying it. So that's partly why I stretch my paper. Now, one side of that is that when I'm working in class and we're just trying techniques, or we're trying little studies or things like that, instead of stretching my paper, I may use masking tape just to tape the edges down and hold my paper in place. And so I buy the Scotch brand masking tape, and this one now has the label on the side of it, on the plastic, and it says general purpose here. Let's see if it shows it. No. But when you turn it to the side, it says high adhesion. And I buy mine at Home Depot. I'm not sure if they have it at the other hardware store, Lowe's, but that was what I was looking for, is the high adhesion. One part to note about this is that you don't want to leave it on your paper taped to your board for a long time, because the high adhesion can mean that that sticky stuff that's really holding the paper down well can attach to the paper, and then you can't get that off. So it is a good thing to use, but you just have to make sure you're taking it off of your paper within probably a month or two to make sure that it doesn't stick to your paper. The other thing that I use this masking tape for is to act as a block on the paper, and for instance on here where this white is reserved and I painted around it, that was done with the masking tape, and so I just pulled off a piece of the masking tape, attached it to the paper, and then you can see you can paint around it and the paint did not seep under it at all. And so that's masking tape, the Scotch brand. And then other supplies, I have a wooden block that I asked my dad to carve for me. And if you have, let me grab either your block of paper that you're painting on that something to lean your board onto, then you can work with your paint and keep paint from running back, and using gravity to help you do the things you need to in watercolor. So it's good to have something to lean your paper or your board onto. And if you don't have someone to create a carved block for you, just using a roll of paper towels underneath it, or you can use your tape that's just a little low, so you want it to be about 2 to 2.5 inches tall. If your paper towel is thicker than this, then you can kind of squish it down and use it that way. But a piece of foam that you might have sitting around the house from packing, that would work as well. And let's see, we talked about a palette, masking tape. So paper towels I use is the Viva brand because they're extra absorbent and they hold up really well. I also have started using a just a sponge. This one's got a lot of paint on it right now, so and you can just use it right next to your water. And I use kind of both, because when I'm painting I will hold a paper towel in my hand and I can clean my brush then, and sometimes when I'm cleaning my brush next to my water containers, I'll use the sponge to take a little bit of water or paint off of it. And so I have a variety of sponges there. And you can see that the Viva paper towels hold up quite a while, and so mine will end up being covered with paint and get wet, and then I'll let them dry for a little bit, and then I'll use them again until this gets a little more covered with paint, and then I'll toss it. And that way I'm not throwing out paper towels constantly. I know some people that will use a white towel or just some kind of a hand towel to wipe their brushes on, and this is one that happens to be from Cheap Joe's, and so you can buy that through them if you want, or you can just find a towel at the store, and some people will throw that over their shoulder and clean their brush on that, or they'll have it at the bottom of their area where they're painting and wipe their brush there. So that's another option if you want to avoid having to buy paper towels or to throw them out all the time. And then I have a spray bottle, and the spray bottle, you do not want to get one that is the little mister bottles that you can get for like traveling. You want one that will give you, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with the mister bottles, because you can use the mister bottles to wet your paint. But most of the time when I am using my spray bottle, one, I can wet my paint with it. I can use it in the center of my palette in order to spray the center and clean it off. And then you can also do techniques with the spray bottle, and for some of those techniques you want the mist to be larger and smaller and random. You don't want it to be all the same little tiny droplets. So having a spray bottle that you can adjust the water that's coming out is important. And let's see, masking is a tool that some watercolorists really like to use and others don't like. And it depends on what you're doing and how you want to do it, whether or not you think you'll end up using it. So I do use masking fluid, and I generally use Winsor & Newton. The one thing you want to be careful of is that it says Winsor & Newton colorless art masking fluid, and you don't want it to say that it's permanent. If it says it's permanent, then it's not the same thing. So it might say permanent mask or permanent masking fluid, but you want it to say colorless art masking fluid. I like the one that doesn't have any color in it. It's just a creamy color, and when it dries it'll be a little darker on the paper, but some of them have fluorescent orange color or yellow in the mask, and it can change what you're seeing as you're painting, because anything that's white later you've saved with the masking fluid, and so instead of these being kind of creamy color where I have put the masking fluid down, they might look green or orange or something like that, and it can distort what you're seeing as you're painting. So to show you how masking fluid works, let me grab a piece of paper right quick. And basically it is liquid, and you need to be careful with masking fluid because you don't want to leave it open for very long. So I'll generally use a separate container and pour some of it into, this is an old film container, but you can get plastic containers that close, so I will pour some into there and use it rather than use it out of the bottle. Plus there are times where I have knocked that and spilled a lot of it, and that's wasteful, costs money. So this little plastic hors d'oeuvre pick that I use, whoa, there's a lot of on there. So you can use the hors d'oeuvre pick to create narrow, thin lines. You can fill in areas with it, and when you're putting your masking fluid on, you want to be careful that you apply it just like you would the paint. You want to have clean edges and not be real messy with it, and it's fine to have it be thicker and not too thin. So masking fluid goes on your paper, then you let it dry, and then once it is dry, then you can paint around it. And this line right here was painted with masking fluid, and then I let it dry, and then I painted around it. And then once I was done with this area and the paint had dried, then I can pull that masking fluid back off, and it has saved the white area of the paper. And so then I can paint color in that if I want to, or I could leave it white. And so that's what masking fluid is. And then this is another brand, and there are others besides these two, but these are the two that I like and have used. This is PBO drawing gum, and it also says on some bottles liquid frisket. So you will hear frisket or masking fluid. And this one is gray, and I don't know if there's any left in here. Yeah, there's a little bit. And the PBO is a little thinner. Whoops. I'm attached to the masking fluid bottle. PBO is a little thinner than the Winsor & Newton, and so when you're taking it off the paper, it makes a lot more little pieces than the Winsor & Newton. However, as you're applying it, you can see it, and you can see where you're placing it. So sometimes that can be helpful to know where you're putting the masking fluid. And so same thing here, this would have to dry, and then I could paint into it once that's dry, or paint around it once it is dry. So we will talk about masking fluid more in class, but that is the basics on it. And again, this bottle can last you quite a while. I don't know that they make them smaller for the Winsor & Newton brand. And then the PBO, I think this is the smaller bottle that they have. So, and I use either the hors d'oeuvre pick or the rubber clay shaper or color shapers to apply the masking fluid. There are other ways that you can apply masking fluid. You can use a craft brush. You can use, I can't remember the name of it. It's a like a sponge, a hard sponge type of substance. But the problem with some of those other things is that it's a lot harder to remove any masking fluid that might be on your tool after you've applied it. And I continually clean this off so that I'm not ending up with little dry pieces of mask on it. Your bottle of masking fluid might say shake. Do not shake masking fluid, because then you end up with bubbles and you go to paint and you're putting bubbly mask on your paper, and you could end up with the bubbles popping and leaving openings. And so one is to try not to have your bottle open for very long, or put it in a smaller container, and then don't shake it. So let's see, let's go on from here. So this would have to dry and then I could paint on it. And some of the other supplies are, I have at home, I have just glass bottles, glass jars that I use to put my water in. And I have two, because I have one for clean water and one for dirty water. And then if I'm traveling to a class or something like that, then I have just plastic containers. And having a large enough opening to get your brush into. So I found out after I bought the glass bottles that this one was too narrow to put my, I can barely get it in there, to put my flat paintbrush in. So this one's better, and so that's why I use it for my clean water. But so having a container where you can put your brush into it. These are old soup containers from the store, just cleaned out really well. And having two of them is really helpful, because if I need clean water to do something I'm working on my paper, then it's good to have both dirty and clean water. Okay, and then I think the last thing is that I already explained I use the mechanical pencil and the eraser when I'm doing my drawings. And then on my supply list is I have a sketchbook to take notes, and also to do any drawings or anything you might need to get ready to work on your watercolor. Oh, and this too. This is goes with the masking fluid, and it's a rubber cement eraser or pickup. I'm not sure how they label it. And basically it's just a rubbery tool, and they come without all of the dirty corners. And so when your masking fluid is dry, then you can take this to pull it back off your paper, and it will help lift the masking fluid away from the watercolor paper. And I think that's it. So I will post the other video on how to stretch your watercolor paper, and the video on the differences between some of the different watercolor papers sometime in the near future, I hope. And at the top of this video, there are links to the different online places that you can purchase supplies, and some of the other information that I think you might find helpful. So, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and you can subscribe and become a follower of my videos online, and I will continue adding to these and hopefully help those that are interested in watercolor get started. Thanks, and I hope to see you in one of my classes or workshops. Bye.